1979 was one of those watershed years in world history. Around the globe, dominoes were falling. Iran's revolution toppled the Shah and created an Islamic republic. In Nicaragua, the Sandinistas overthrew the Somoza dictatorship. The Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan in December, setting off a new flashpoint in the Cold War. And in the US, these events shaped the mood leading into the 1980 presidential election, setting the stage for Ronald Reagan's rise to power. This was the volatile world in which the Iran-Contra affair would later unfold. All right, everyone, today we're diving into one of the strangest and most scandalous episodes of modern US history, the Iran-Contra affair. It's got everything: secret wars, arms deals, revolutions, covert CIA operations, shredded documents, and a president who swore he couldn't remember a thing. This is why Iran-Contra fascinates historians. It's part spy thriller, part constitutional crisis. To understand Iran-Contra, we need to zoom out. We're in the early 1980s. The United States and the Soviet Union are still locked in the Cold War, an ideological and geopolitical standoff between capitalism and communism. Every revolution, every coup, every civil war around the globe was viewed through this lens. Ronald Reagan was the US president from 1981 to 1989, and he came into office promising to take a hard line against communism. He called the Soviet Union the evil empire, and Reagan's foreign policy advisors, people like National Security Advisor Robert McFarlane and later Admiral John Poindexter, believed that any left-wing revolution in Latin America was basically a Moscow franchise. Now let's meet Nicaragua. In 1979, the Nicaraguan dictator Anastasio Somoza was overthrown. He had ruled with US support for decades, but his regime was corrupt and brutal. His opponents, a leftist revolutionary group called the Sandinista National Liberation Front, or simply the Sandinistas. The Sandinistas were inspired by Marxism, Cuba's revolution, and anti-imperialism. They launched programs like land reform, literacy campaigns, and had close ties with Cuba and the Soviet Union. To Reagan, this was a nightmare. A communist beachhead just a 2-hour flight from Miami. The fear was the classic domino theory. If Nicaragua stayed red, El Salvador, Guatemala, and maybe even Mexico would tumble next. So Reagan's policy stopped the Sandinistas. To fight them, the US backed the Contras, a mix of former Somoza soldiers, mercenaries, and anti-communist rebels. The name comes from counter-revolutionaries. They were trained, armed, and financed in secret by the CIA. Where did they operate from? Neighboring Honduras and Costa Rica, because the Sandinistas controlled Nicaragua itself. Think of it as launching raids across the border. But here's the problem. Reports of Contra atrocities started piling up. Massacres of civilians, assassinations, even drug trafficking. Many in Congress said, hold up, we don't want another Vietnam. So in 1982, Congress passed the Boland Amendment, which forbade US funds from being used to overthrow the Nicaraguan government. In other words, Reagan's hands were tied, at least on paper. Meanwhile, in Iran, at the very same time across the world, the US faced another problem in Iran. In 1979, the Iranian Revolution overthrew the Shah, a US-backed monarch, and replaced him with Ayatollah Khomeini's Islamic Republic. Shortly after, the infamous Iran hostage crisis unfolded. 52 Americans were held hostage in Tehran for 444 days. US-Iran relations collapsed. Washington slapped on an arms embargo. But here's the twist. the US still worried about Iran's neighbor, Iraq. Saddam Hussein had invaded Iran in 1980, and Washington quietly wanted Iran not to collapse completely because if Iran fell, the Soviets might swoop in. By 1985, some of Reagan's advisors thought, well, what if we secretly sell weapons to Iran? Why? One, to gain leverage and maybe free American hostages held by Iranian-backed groups in Lebanon. And two, to open a back channel with so-called moderates in Iran. On paper, this violated the embargo, but hey, who's counting? Now comes the real twist. How do Iran and Nicaragua connect? Reagan's National Security Council staffer, a Marine lieutenant colonel named Oliver North, had an idea. If the US secretly sells missiles to Iran, it makes money. And since Congress cut off aid to the Contras, why not use the profits from those arms sales to secretly fund them? That way, Iran gets weapons, hostages might be freed, the Contras keep fighting, and Congress, well, they're kept in the dark. Sounds like the plot of a Tom Clancy novel. But here's the thing. Secret wars don't stay secret. In 1986, a Lebanese magazine, Al-Shira, exposed the US arms sales to Iran. The report revealed that the US had secretly sold arms to Iran as part of a deal to free American hostages in Lebanon. Shortly after, a plane carrying supplies to the Contras was shot down over Nicaragua, and a US operative was captured. These events set off the chain reaction. US media picked it up, Congress launched investigations, and the whole Iran-Contra scandal unraveled in public view. Congress held hearings. Americans were shocked. The government was selling arms to a sworn enemy, violating its own embargo, and using the money to fund a war Congress had explicitly forbidden. This was, in a word, illegal. So who took responsibility? National Security Advisor John Poindexter resigned. Lieutenant Colonel Oliver North was hauled before Congress. His testimony was dramatic. He wore his Marine uniform, took the oath, and basically said, yes, I shredded documents. Yes, I ran this operation, but I thought I was defending democracy.
Colonel, you testified when I put a question to you that you did not recall whether the Admiral had told you that the President had requested the Attorney General to act. Do you recall that?
I do.
You are the person who volunteered that fact in response to one of my questions. Do you recall that?
I do.
And my question to you was, would that have made a difference? You're the person who surfaced it.
Don't get angry, Counsel. I'm going to answer your question. If the Admiral had told me that the President had asked the Attorney General to conduct a fact-finding inquiry into all of the aspects of what I had done, and that I should tell the Attorney General everything, then I would have done so. Does that answer your question, sir?
And
the Admiral did not tell me that.
And if the Admiral had told you that, you wouldn't have done the quantity of shredding that you did, is that correct?
We can play hypothetical games all night. If the Admiral had told me not to shred, I wouldn't have shredded.
Did you tell the Admiral that you were going to shred?
Pardon?
Did you tell the Admiral that you were going to shred?
I told the Admiral that I was cleaning up my files. I told him that well before this began. I assured him on the 21st that I'd already done most of it.
Mr. Chairman, may I object, please? There has to be a reasonable limit to questions posed about shredding. I mean, how many hours, how many days, how many times? The Colonel has admitted shredding I would say, conservatively, 125 times. I please respectfully ask, could we move on?
I honestly think, and I'm not trying to be light about it, we've spent more time talking about it than I spent doing it. I honestly mean that. I shredded. I was never told not to shred. I shredded because I thought it was the right thing to do. When I didn't have a shredder, I put it in a burn bag and they were burned. And when the time came that I saw the entire situation change and I was faced with the possibility of being the victim of a criminal prosecution, I then took action to protect myself. I took my notebooks home and I took papers home and I kept them until I turned them over to you and to the White House.
The hearings became must-see TV in 1987. And President Reagan, he went on national television and said, "A few months ago, I told the American people I did not trade arms for hostages. My heart and my best intentions still tell me that's true, but the facts and the evidence tell me it is not." During the Tower Commission investigation, President Reagan repeatedly said he could not recall key meetings or decisions about authorizing arms sales or diverting funds to the Contras.
First, let me say I take full responsibility for my own actions and for those of my administration. As angry as I may be about activities undertaken without my knowledge, I am still accountable for those activities. As disappointed as I may be in some who served me, I am still the one who must answer to the American people for this behavior. And as personally distasteful as I find secret bank accounts and diverted funds, well, as the Navy would say, this happened on my watch. Let's start with the part that is the most controversial. A few months ago, I told the American people I did not trade arms for hostages. My heart and my best intentions still tell me that's true, but the facts and the evidence tell me it is not. As the Tower Board reported, what began as a strategic opening to Iran deteriorated in its implementation into trading arms for hostages. This runs counter to my own beliefs, to administration policy, and to the original strategy we had in mind. There are reasons why it happened, but no excuses. It was a mistake. I undertook the original Iran initiative in order to develop relations with those who might assume leadership in a post-Khomeini government. It's clear from the board's report, however, that I let my personal concern for the hostages spill over into the geopolitical strategy of reaching out to Iran. I asked so many questions about the hostages' welfare that I didn't ask enough about the specifics of the total Iran plan. Let me say to the hostage families, we have not given up. We never will. And I promise you we'll use every legitimate means to free your loved ones from captivity. But I must also caution that those Americans who freely remain in such dangerous areas must know that they're responsible for their own safety. Now, another major aspect of the board's findings regards the transfer of funds to the Nicaraguan Contras. The Tower Board wasn't able to find out what happened to this money. So the facts here will be left to the continuing investigations of the court-appointed independent counsel and the 2 congressional investigating committees. I'm confident the truth will come out about this matter as well. As I told the Tower Board, I didn't know about any diversion of funds to the Contras, but as president, I cannot escape responsibility.
Historians will still debate whether Reagan was genuinely out of the loop or whether this was part of a strategy of plausible deniability. Either way, this was one of the most dramatic episodes of the Cold War. A rare moment when a sitting US president admitted on live TV that he had been wrong, even while insisting that in his heart he still believed he was right. It's a masterclass in Cold War era political communication. So why was Iran-Contra such a big scandal? It broke US law, the Boland Amendment. It violated Reagan's own anti-terrorism policy. We don't negotiate with terrorists, except we did. It showed a shadow government where mid-level officers like Oliver North ran their own foreign policy. It raised huge questions about accountability. Did President Reagan know? In the end, several officials were convicted, but most convictions were overturned on appeal. And in 1992, President George H.W. Bush pardoned the remaining defendants. The Iran-Contra affair left scars. It weakened trust in government, exposed the limits of congressional oversight, and showed how Cold War paranoia led to wild, illegal schemes. If you want to dig deeper, here are a few great primary sources. The 1987 Tower Commission report from the official investigation, the transcripts of the 1987 congressional Iran-Contra hearings. Lieutenant Colonel Oliver North's testimony is especially worth reading. President Reagan's televised March 4, 1987 speech admitting mistakes. And read the Boland Amendments from 1982 to 84, a series of congressional measures restricting U.S. aid to the Nicaraguan Contras, with the key 1984 version imposing a total ban on U.S. support. And for secondary sources, you have Theodore Draper's A Very Thin Line and Peter Kornbluh's The Iran-Contra Scandal, the declassified history. It's full of documents. And that, folks, is the Iran-Contra affair. Thanks for watching.